even wrong.
The NIE is sent over to Congress. It's kept in a classified vault, and as far as we can tell, only about a half a dozen senators actually read it. Had they done so, they would have seen that it was filled with dissents.
If I'd read the national intelligence estimate on Iraq, I probably would have I've done myself a favor by being better informed on the intelligence rather than listening to the administration.
As a congressional resolution to authorize war is put to a vote, most Republicans stand solidly behind President Bush.
The forces of freedom are on the march, and terrorists will find no safe harbor in this world.
Democrats are deeply divided.
It is wrong for Congress to declare war against Iraq now before we have exhausted the alternatives.
I urge senators to go down on the Capitol Mall and look at the Vietnam Memorial.
We were 2 months out from an election, and no one, Republican, Democrat, Independent, ever wants to be viewed as weak on national security.
I will vote to give the president the authority he needs.
The threat of Saddam Hussein with weapons of mass destruction is real.
It is a vote that puts awesome responsibility in the hands of our president. And we say to him, use these powers wisely and as a last resort.
In my heart, I knew that a no to the authority for the president was the right vote, but yet I was not strong enough to vote my conscience.
Joint resolution is passed without objection.
The vote is overwhelming. The margin is more than 3-1 in the Senate. It's more than 2-1 in the House. The president is officially given a free hand.
The days of Iraq acting as an outlaw state are coming to an end.
Powell walked into my office, and without so much as a fare-thee-well, he walked over to the window and he said, I wonder what will happen when we put 500,000 troops into Iraq and comb the country from one end to the other and find nothing. And he turned around and walked back in his office. And I wrote that down on my calendar, as close to verbatim as I could, because I thought that was a profound statement coming from the Secretary of State, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
The march to war begins in earnest, and it is Colin Powell who gets the job of selling it to the world.
What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence.
Anybody who says this was an intelligence-driven war, I believe, is mistaken. End stop.
By the end of 2002, the U.S. military is headed to the Gulf. Congress is on board, as are British Prime Minister Tony Blair and most of the mainstream media. The stage is set for war. A new UN resolution has forced Iraq to submit to tough new arms inspections. But President Bush is growing impatient. The Defense Department tells him that if he's going to war, he's got to do it before the blistering desert summer.
We were moving along the path of getting a good inspection going that would probably come to fruition one way or the other. But once you start military forces flowing to the extent that we did for Iraq, it's hard to pull them back.
As the inevitable moves closer, President Bush re-argues the case and ups the ante with 16 infamous words in a State of the Union address.
The British government has learned that Saddam Hussein recently sought significant quantities of uranium from Africa.
That would be yellow cake, again. But by referring to a 6-month-old British white paper, the president does an end run around a claim discredited by his own intelligence service.
It wasn't a matter of lying about this or lying about that, but rather through the artistry of speechwriters and case presenters, conveying an impression to the American people that certain things were true.
It's a real sleight of hand, and I think it's kind to call that disingenuous.
On the heels of the president's speech, the administration plays its ultimate trump card. It tasks Secretary of State Colin Powell, its most trusted public face, its most reluctant warrior, to make the case against Saddam at the United Nations. He's given a week to pull that presentation together.
He walked in my office with a sheaf of papers in his hand, and he threw them down on my desk, and he said, "That's the script of my presentation at the United Nations." Came from Vice President's office. It was junk. It was pure junk. I was in charge of putting it together.
Powell and Wilkerson tear up the original 48-page script and start over with a team from the State Department and CIA. Director George Tenet suggests they base their presentation on the National Intelligence Estimate, which, unbeknownst to Powell, is a deeply flawed document. Still, he is wary.
We went into a room, he slammed the door shut. He said, "Sit down." And he sat down. We were the only two people in the room. He looked at me and he said, "This bullshit of contacts with Al-Qaeda has got to be taken out. It's bullshit." And I said, "I agree with you. Let's take it out." Done. Within a half an hour, Tenet comes in and explosively tells about this high-level Al-Qaeda operative who's been interrogated and admitted to these contacts. Whoa. And we put it back in.
That would be the dubious confession extracted from Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi, the result of torture by the Egyptians.
Both of us convinced ourselves that if the intelligence community believed what we were presenting, then we had to believe it, because they were the experts.
I wrote part of his speech, and what I saw over the course of weeks, up until the night before he gave that speech, and in fact into the early morning, 1, 2 a.m., was, does this fit? Is this compelling? Who can pick a hole in this? I'm going to stand in front of 1 billion people. What I say better be the clearest and most credible information we have.
On February 5th, 2003, the moment of truth arrives.
The 4,701st meeting of the Security Council is called to order.
The World Witness's Colin Powell delivered the ultimate argument for war against Iraq.
What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence. I will cite some examples, and these are from human sources.
I was at CIA headquarters, and all of us sort of gathered around the TV in the office to watch his speech live from the UN.
We have first-hand descriptions of biological weapons factories on wheels and on rails.
Those would be descriptions by the discredited witness, Curveball.
As he's talking about this and showing vials of white powder and so forth, I turned to a woman next to me who had followed this whole case of Curveball much more closely than I. I said, "What the hell is going on?" And my colleague said, "I don't know. I don't know what's going on. What is this?"
We did not know he was in Germany. We did not know he had a code name, Curveball. We did not know that no U.S. intelligence personnel had ever interrogated him.
Based on defector information, in May of 1991, Saddam Hussein had a massive clandestine nuclear weapons program that covered several different techniques to enrich uranium.
That would be defector information supplied by the notoriously unreliable Ahmed Chalabi, head of the Iraqi National Congress, the self-appointed expatriate Iraqi shadow government.
We talked to Chalabi on multiple occasions, and we saw that, they were hyping the type of information they put out.
He is so determined that he has made repeated covert attempts to acquire high-specification aluminum tubes from 11 different countries, even after inspections resumed.
Yet again, the aluminum tubes.
I was incredibly disappointed when he brought out comments about the aluminum tubes. I felt betrayed as an American and a scientist.
I can trace the story of a senior terrorist operative telling how Iraq provided training in these weapons to Al-Qaeda. Fortunately, this operative is now detained, and he has told his story.
Powell is referring to Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi, the same detainee the CIA labeled a fabricator.
Zakawi and his infrastructure with a built-in ally.
Powell takes 90 minutes to run through his persuasive litany of evidence. Much of it will turn out to be, at best, inaccurate.
Thank you, Mr. President.
If you look at that speech in retrospect, there's a little too much of what we think and not enough of what we don't know. There's too much certitude in the speech. That's not Secretary Powell's problem. that's on us as intelligence professionals.
Secretary of State Powell set aside his personal misgivings and staked his global reputation for integrity on this one moment, selling the case for war.
Though neither Powell nor anyone else from the State Department team intentionally lied, we did participate in a hoax.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. Our nation enters this conflict reluctantly, yet our purpose is sure.
The conquest goes quickly, and just as quickly, a country liberated from a dictator dissolves into chaos.
Freedom's untidy, and free people are free to make mistakes and commit crimes and do bad things.
An administration eager to go to war fails disastrously to plan for its aftermath. And after 19 months of scouring the country, the truth about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction is finally revealed.
There are no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and there haven't been for a long time.
A new report by the chief U.S. weapons inspector finds that Iraq got rid of its weapons of mass destruction shortly after the first Gulf War.
I wasn't supposed to find WMD. I was supposed to find the truth. I did not fail to find WMD. I succeeded in finding the truth.
You're telling us, in addition to having no WMD stocks before the war, for the reasons you gave, Saddam chose not to have those weapons. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Those are stunning statements.
It was a terrible mistake. The CIA had said we would find stockpiles that we didn't find. It was a disaster.
And you believed it was true at the time?
Yes, so did they. They shouldn't have. I mean, there were a lot of people in the agency, in the community, that knew some of this information wasn't, as solid as it was being presented to me.
It's not just an intelligence failure. It's a failure to the very highest levels of decision-making in America. George W. Bush and Richard Bruce Cheney would have gone to war with Iraq and gotten rid of Saddam Hussein, even if there wasn't any intelligence at all.
It is at worst lies and deception. It is at best incompetence and lack of understanding.
A lot of people who purposefully used extreme rhetoric to gin up popular support for the war, there have been no consequences for them.
We sit here some 8 years later, 4,000 Americans lost their lives, maybe 100,000 Iraqis lost their lives. It cost about $1 trillion. Was it worth it? Did you give the right advice?
I think I did. If you look back at the proposition we faced after 9/11, with respect to Saddam Hussein, we were very concerned about the prospects of terrorists like the 9/11 crowd acquiring weapons of mass destruction, biological agent or nuclear weapon that they could use on the United States.
There's no question the news media didn't do its job during the run-up to the Iraq War. Far too often, the press simply accepted these sweeping assertions by the highest officials in the government without looking for the hard evidence to support it.
I was more concerned about the politics of my decision rather than what is right and what is wrong. I have prayed to God many times that He would forgive me for sending His children to die in a war that never had to happen.
Was there ever any consideration of apologizing to the American people?